Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, hosted by pertains, powered by NLP Logics. Your lines have been muted, but we encourage you to post any questions for our panelists through the Q&A Zoom feature. Our panelists will answer as many questions as time allows at the end of today's webinar. Additionally, we encourage you to ensure your view option is set to split screen to view both our presentation as well as all of our panelists. Today's webinar will be moderated by Ed Margolis. Edwin is a co-founder and CEO of 3.0 Inc. He is best known for his core strategies, leadership, and high-tech industry launches. As a serial entrepreneur, he helped grow companies like Dialogic, Telephony at Work, and SoCo Care, all of which were acquired or went public. He's an inventor with 10 patents and a high-tech book author with 18 titles published. Titles include Social Engagement for Customer Care and Understanding the Voice-Enabled Internet. He and his wife run a nonprofit animal sanctuary on their ranch in Central Texas. I will now pass it over to Ed to introduce our panelists and begin today's discussion. Ed?
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm very pleased to be here today and be in the company of this team of experts. I'm sure you will all enjoy this topic of breaking through with AI, surviving economic downturn in asset recovery management. First, I'd like to do an intro for Katie Bakewell. She's a lead statistician at NLP Logics and has been with the company for 7 years. For 5.5 of those 7 years, she's been building the comprehensive pertains platform. That focuses on using machine learning to best identify who will pay for armed clients, hence the name pertains. A little fun fact here, Katie's first career was in cooking. And during her time cooking, Katie worked at the first Jacksonville restaurant to be nominated for a James Beard Award. Her conditioning for working at NLP Logics was, hey, I'll work here if you never make me talk to anyone. But on her second day, she had to make a presentation to a customer, and some say she's never stopped talking since. I'm sure you'll enjoy what Katie has to share today. Also, we have Rick Britt, and he's the head of artificial intelligence at CallMiner. He leads a talented team of data scientists and AI engineers that are as passionate about machine learning solutions as he is. He and his team are keenly focused on research that does not replace humans, but rather helps them to succeed. Fun fact, Rick is also an alcohol scientist. He studied and attempted to master not only mixology, but making consumable alcohol as well. Rick says the fun is in the journey, not just the destination. So we're very pleased to have Rick with us here today. And last but not least, we have Liz Schuerman. Liz spent the better part of a decade in first and third party collections early in her career, followed by 5 years at Thomson Reuters, solving for the financial and risk data needs of some of North America's largest financial institutions. As Catabat's regional sales manager, she helps the financial industry layer in machine learning to optimize digital collections processes. Fun fact, Liz has 3 rescue dogs, Border Collie Pickle, Coonhound Stella, and an old lady mixed breed named Lola. So thank you for being here, Liz. This is our expert panelists, and we're sure that you'll have a great time hearing what they have to share. Please be aware that towards the end, we will have a Q&A session, and Lindsay will be fielding questions from the audience, and the panelists will tackle them. So now let us continue with our webinar discussion points. Now, this might sound a little bit provocative, but it's pretty straightforward. You know, the first question that we'll be going around the room talking about is, you know, what do we mean by AI? I mean, AI is a very big word, artificial intelligence. It conjures all kinds of images of robotics, Skynet, you know, Stanley Kubrick. But, you know, this is more about the practical use of AI. So we want to try to put it into context in terms of, you know, what is the practical application? So first, let me bring Katie Bakewell in to take a stab at this very big question. Katie.
So I really like what you said, Ed, of AI, it conjures up so many different ideas. So it's just full of buzzwords. It's everything from, robotics to what we'll be talking about today, which is in the machine learning side of things. So everybody says, yeah, I can add AI to your call center. I can add AI to your, recovery operations. And it can mean so many things. It's not that we're going to go and add a game that can play Super Mario, but that's certainly an application of AI. The area that we're focused in is machine learning. So for Paypensity, what AI means is using machines to identify patterns within your underlying data in order to identify who is most likely to pay within a subgroup of debtors. So how about you, Rick? What would you say AI means to you?
Yeah, like you, Katie, it's such a huge question and when asked that way, but to narrow it down, sort of in our world, it's kind of automating the things that humans do already, things that humans are already good at doing. Like great examples are like driving or speaking. So if you think about how many times have you been driving to somewhere, perhaps to work, back when we used to drive to work before coronavirus, and you don't remember how you got there. You just sort of arrive at work and you have no memory of the actual drive. It's because it's so mundane. It's been done so many times that your brain processed all the data it took to drive to work and just discarded everything that wasn't of importance. And on that particular day, there was nothing of importance that it would remember. The same, it's similar when you're talking to someone. There are conversations you remember and then lots of conversations that you don't. Obviously, this webinar will be one you'll remember for the rest of your lives, but let's assume there's others that you really don't remember. What's happening is your brain is taking an enormous amount of data, and it's only processing those things which are important to it. And so when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about replicating those similar processes with machines, but the machines interpret every piece of data. They remember every drive to work. They remember every conversation. And so as a speech analytics company, using artificial intelligence, we're able to mark and tag interactions in a way that it remembers them. And where this becomes important is when you want to look at conversations, let's say across a large span of agents. One of our BPOs is 300,000 agents worldwide, right? So there's so many agents that no one can contemplate a single conversation in that environment except for the person who had it. But a machine can. It can actually look at every interaction. It can begin to point out the things in those interactions that are different, the same, similar, and also begin to pluck out the stop signs or the traffic signals or the things that were blown by that driver or that conversation that should have been noticed and recognized. Because agents go in, you guys all know, you have agents on the phone, they go into autopilot. They take 300 calls in a week or 50 in a day, and they just go into autopilot, and using NLP or natural language processing to help a human notice those little road things that they didn't notice before, those little conversational markers. And that's what we mean by AI, is using a machine to contemplate data sets so large humans can't understand them in a way that it can provide back the recommendations to those humans, and they can actually get better at what they do because they don't have to pay attention. It says you might want to stop the car, or even better off, in a Tesla sense, it actually stops the car for you. That's what, when we talk about AI, that's where we come from, is that particular approach. But I think, Liz, you have a different interpretation as well on your side.
I do. And I love the autopilot analogy. I think that's a really great way to put it. But just thinking through the different responses, I think it's pretty obvious that the answer depends entirely on who you're talking to and what you're trying to accomplish. So there's many different flavors of AI, and it's one of those terms that gets thrown around pretty loosely. So in my world, AI means leveraging machine learning to continuously improve your collection strategy by selecting the most appropriate treatment. So what that means is the machine chooses best channel, best message, best timing for that particular individual based on the data that's coming in. So a lot of the folks that we talk to on a daily basis are doing some form of champion challenger or A/B testing in their strategy. This strategy against that strategy, this email against that email, to find out which one is going to be the most successful. It's a manual process, and machine learning allows them to start to drive those efficiencies much quicker without human intervention. So it doesn't mean all human intervention, your existing strategy goes out the window. you may start with 10% of your account population to test the machine, to let it learn over time and to test it against that manual strategy.
Thanks, Liz, and everyone. This is a great way of kicking off the discussion. So as everyone can see, you know, AI means a lot of different things, and our panelists have a particular interest in a part of AI that helps you to move the needle of productivity in your operation. Now, along those lines, our second question or discussion point has to do with, you know, how do I go about actually plugging AI into my existing operation? So as a preamble to this, I'd just like to mention that you don't have to worry about forklifting out anything. You can take advantage of artificial intelligence because a lot of this software, a lot of these solutions can nestle into what you're already using. There's no need to rip anything out. So please be assured that you don't have to turn your operation upside down to take advantage of AI. So Rick, why don't we start with you about the idea of just how do I plug in?
Yeah, I think that the answer that is best here is really we need to understand sort of what you're solving for, and it becomes a data question. Let me give you an example. So think about measuring someone's emotions, and we get a lot of questions from people. Call centers. I'd like to know when someone is angry. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how do you know when someone is angry? How do we humans know when someone that is emoting or presenting a negative sentiment towards us, that's anger, not frustration, or that's not another emotion on the spectrum? The answer is there's a hidden set of rules that society has taught us, and we can't write those down. We don't really know what they are. I just know when someone, or I know when I believe someone is angry, when I'm interpreting that as anger. I may be wrong. But I know that I can get it close enough. So, to plug AI into operations, machine learning is just a component of our artificial intelligence. There's a whole other component that isn't as sexy to talk about, and that is the rules. And so when an organization is plugging artificial intelligence into its operations, they need to understand the rules under which they want to operate, which is do you want to change your organization systemically or behaviorally? And a systemic change is the best kind of change, right? Humans come to work and they do the same job they did yesterday. They just do it on a better set of inputs, and that's wonderful. But behavioral changes are also important. That is a human choosing to do something different today based on an input than they did yesterday. So companies need to really understand what part of their organization do they want to change and what kind of effort do they want to have to make that change. It's really easy to move to change a collector's book while the collector is at home. It is not as easy to ask a collector to say something on every phone call. And so it takes different parts of the organization. Moving a collector's book is relatively easy because you can just structure it to be there when they walk in the door. You may have some emotions that my book wasn't there yesterday that I got today, but on the human change side, that takes quality assurance, coaches, leadership, training. There's a lot of energy that goes there. Both of them have ROIs. Both of them return to that company. It's just how much lift do they want. So when you think about what AI you want to plug in, think about how you want to use it. What is the outcome you're looking for, and what part of your system do you want to change? Because if you want to change the rules or the inputs or the processes or how we use information, you can. It's just going to take different effort to bring that particular new insight into the organization.
Thanks, Rick. And Liz, tell us what your interpretation is of plugging in. I mean, plugging into an operation. How easy is it to plug in without having to make a whole bunch of wholesale changes to infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think to kind of pull the thread a little bit on what Rick was speaking to, there's always going to be this spectrum of different options and different ways to potentially implement AI into your existing operations. So it could be very much a turnkey, easy to deploy solution that's just going to sit, next to your existing landscape, or it could be something a little bit more involved. I think the perception can sometimes be that it's too complicated to implement, and it's something that I'm not sophisticated enough to want to explore how machine learning is going to drive efficiency for my business. So I think one of the biggest keys for people to consider when they're out there doing their research is sort of laser focus. So what are you trying to accomplish? So at Catabat, for example, the only goal is to generate higher response rates in the context of debt collections. So having that laser focus on what exactly you're trying to accomplish will allow you to sort of facilitate that implementation and how difficult that's going to be, what that lift is going to look like. So it can be as simple as ingesting a score, right? So taking in like a propensity to pay score and using that in your existing strategy. In my case, our strategy engine comes enabled with machine learning. So it's really a turnkey digital solution powered by machine learning. You can use us for sort of end-to-end strategy while running just a subset of your accounts, as I said earlier, through that machine. Or if you're not using the full engine, just sending that subset off to Catabat to run the machine learning process and continuing to test it against your existing strategy. So I think the one thing that's kind of cool, one of the analogies that we use internally is once you're up and running, you can think of it as Netflix for strategy, right? So the machine's going to select and change the strategy over time based on those attributes of an individual.
Nice.
For us, I think we, like Rick said, there's the systemic change and the behavioral change. So we're, call miners coming in, and there's a lot of that behavioral change that's really necessary, where you want to be fully integrated and you want to, have people really buy into that change. Propensity is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, where we're looking at creating a score. So everyone who is doing collections is doing some sort of skip tracing, or they're doing some sort of scoring right now with the bureaus. So, what we've tried to do is build out a solution that can be as easy as those things. So, an FTP exchange or an API call that sends out data and then it receives back a scored list that you can integrate into your system. There's definitely cases where we get a little bit more integrated, be that through, helping develop strategies and helping understand how to use the propensity score, how can we incorporate that more, or by incorporating it with something like the decisions platform that allows you to, build it truly into your workflow to decide what you're doing within the workflow. But, we try as AI companies, I think all three of us, to make as seamless of an integration as possible. Nobody's trying to come in and say, completely change everything you do, get rid of all of your agents. We're all coming in and saying, let's do what we can to make the agents better with as little sort of turmoil as possible.
Thanks, Katie. That's very insightful. And well, let me ask you, based on this next discussion point kind of leads into this, let's talk about how do you help your clients, your enterprise clients get customers to resolve their debt or understand the propensity to pay? Can you give us just a little bit of insight on how you do that? You were talking about APIs and reading information from a database and then kind of swapping records so that the outbound dial list is modified, but can you give us just a little bit more depth?
Sure. So what I like to think of it as is, everybody knows about the credit scores. You take information about a person, how much credit do they have leveraged, how much available credit do they have, what does their payment history look like, and you take all of that information and say, okay, what's the likelihood that this person can pay me? So I like to look at a propensity to pay score. Instead of the credit score being who can pay, we rather would look at who will pay. So we take a historical inventory of data. So going back, as far as we can with trustworthy data, I tend to find that people, I've got data going back to 1992, and that data from the 90s might not have been stored in the same system. It all got converted. So, as far back as we can go that's historically sound, I like to take all of that data and augment it with some external information, be that economic models or be that information about the consumer's location. So you can take census information and get things like, are they likely to be rent burdened? What's their likely income? What's their likely disposable income? And take all of that information and give it to the computer and say, hey, here's this pattern. And like Rick said, I can only consume a couple things at once. I can say, hey, people with a lower balance pay more, but a computer can consume all of those pieces of information at once. So we give the computer all of the data all at one time, and it goes through and integrates and says, what information can I use to decide whether or not this person is likely to have paid or not? And it looks at its results, and it learns just like a kid does. It tests against itself and says, hey, I'm doing a little better this time. I'm doing a little better this time, and it improves. So we go through that process and identify, these are the people that are most likely to pay. And then what I like to do on top of that is, instead of just giving somebody the probability of payment, probability of payment tends to be a little bit biased towards the lower balances. Somebody who owes you $10 is a lot more likely to pay you than somebody that owes you 10 grand. So if I tell you, hey, you should go and call all the people with the lowest balance, we're not really going to give you a satisfactory result there. So we like to take that propensity to pay and blend it with an expected value to let you go after the debt that's going to provide you the most value for the least amount of effort.
So Katie, in practice, does that mean that after you do the run all these algorithms and do the massaging of that data, do you then return a list to the enterprise client, and then they then just upload that into their system, or is it done programmatically? How does it actually work?
So there's a couple different ways it can work. It can just be, here's a list of probabilities, and it's one column in an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV. We can also do things like, I like to do a little bit of what we call post-processing, where instead of providing just a probability, we like to provide a probability and a decile, which is what 10% bucket does this fall into, so that you can work against your top 10%. If you had a month where you only got, kind of not great debt, you wouldn't just say, well, I guess we'll try again next month and not work the debt this month. So when you provide something like a decile, it lets you go and work towards your best 10% every time and sort of stabilize the amount of work that you're doing, rather than saying, I'm going to use this cutoff and just hope for better debt next time.
That's great.
So I think to kind of add on to Katie's point a little bit, I think it's so interesting, there's only so many hours in a workday, right? So with all the doom and gloom, all the things that's happening right now, it's important for you to identify where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So using a propensity to pay score, and then I'm sure Rick would probably touch on, making the most of that call, those calls that you're going to place out to those folks, and driving those efficiencies using AI is going to ensure, as that sort of delinquency wave comes, you're sort of set to handle it appropriately.
Yeah, Liz, you're right. You think about collections, it's first call, which is propensity to pay, right? Who is the best first dial today of someone I've never reached before? There's also a large group of collection calls that, to Katie's point, have to be dialed again. If people don't resolve on the first interaction, they resolve on the third or the fourth interaction. And so we've actually been able to create, using the language of the call, pieces like willingness and ability language in calls, which can influence the propensity to pay score down the road. So you made the first call, you spoke to someone, and then who do you call next? So you've got 100 to make tomorrow, you've got some news and you got some olds. And so using the language in there that the customer used that said, yeah, I'm unemployed, but when I have the money, I really want to pay you, is different than, well, listen, I'm going to get paid on Friday because I just got a job last week, and I really want to resolve this. And so using language as well from that previous interaction, the freshest data, is what Katie was talking about. What is the best and longest stream of data you can get? Adding data every time you talk to someone really sharpens up each minute of each hour of the day, because you can only dial X number of people to Liz's point.
And then I'm just going to respond real quick to a question, which is, for compliance purposes in third-party collections, is there data that cannot or should not be used to produce a propensity to pay score? And the thing that I would say there is, I tend to lean on the overly conservative side here. I know, having gone through with some of our clients some CFPB audits and had to face, like, what is the model doing? I try to be as explainable as possible and to minimize things like, age, we're never going to put race, we're never going to put age, gender, things like that in the model. And we also go through a little bit of analysis on the back end, just comparing our results to census data to ensure that we're not excluding any particular group as well. I know that, there's been circumstances where maybe, English speakers were excluded from a settlement offer. When that happens, you're exposing yourself to pretty significant risk with the FDCPA. So what the side that I like to err on is the overly cautious and minimizing anything that could possibly add bias. It's not something that's always avoidable, but we try and be, probably as conservative as we can on that subject.
Thanks, Katie. That reminds me, there's other questions we need to ask now about engaging with customer conversations. So there's kind of a mix here. We've talked about, propensity to pay and about how that can be weaved into the operation. And I'd like to, ask Rick to give us a little bit on, how do we drive more engaging customer conversations using AI? And Rick, if you could also please add a little bit of color commentary on, in practice, how do you integrate into an existing operation? How do you take CallMiner and stick it into an existing call center infrastructure application, for example? That would be good.
Sure, thanks, Ed. In the simplest sense, measuring engagement is difficult without using artificial intelligence. You just need too much data to try to figure out what is engagement and what isn't. But within the machine learning confines, with a large amount of data, you can actually begin to figure out what is engagement, mainly through outcomes, right? There's a desired outcome on a collection call, which is resolution of some sort. And there's also a not desired outcome, which is not resolution or something else. And so beginning to measure the level of engagement and what happens at each moment of an interaction, to look for the deviations and anomalies from that baseline is important. And that's really what, CallMiner specializes in, is pointing out, after an interaction is over, what are the deviations and anomalies from that baseline? What made it different from the one that you wanted, or what made it similar? What was done right, what wasn't? Not just at the call level, but the agent level and the work group level and the debt level, whoever gave it to you, whoever's debt you're working. Looking at large enough populations of this dark data, we can begin to shed light on them in a very unique way. Sort of what was said in the call, it would be like the words that people use, how it was said, and those would be the acoustic and prosodic measures that people use to say those words. You don't always have to use a curse word to sound angry. And then the behaviors of that person who said them, these would be things like interruptions. Who interrupted who, and why did they interrupt? What were they talking about before that interruption happened? Was it interruption from frustration or interruption from excitement? Did they want to add something to the conversation? And so as you begin to bring all these things together, it begins to create these clues and markers that most humans aren't aware of. And that can help drive engagement. And to your point, it was two very successful ways to do so. In a post-call sense, we have a product called Coach, and what it does is it's almost like a social media platform that allows coaches, agents, really anyone in the organization to interact with the interaction, an email or a chat or a text or a phone call. They can interact in that interaction by saying, hey, look at these few words, or listen to this 20 seconds. This is the area where I think if you did a little better, you might find something that you didn't find at the end of that call, or hey, here's an area where maybe we'd be in compliance risk if you continue down this path. That's great. Post-call, it helps you coach, it helps you market. And once you mark those things, we have a real-time product that allows you to put it right on the desktop. And so as someone is speaking, it can trigger them, hey, this is that thing we spoke about, you're gonna wanna do that. And if they don't, it actually flashes on a dashboard at whatever level you want. We can definitely email the CEO all the way down to having a supervisor sitting there and having their screen flash red to say, hey, they're out of compliance, or they didn't use that thing that you need them to use that will get you the result you're looking for. And right in that moment, they can learn and get the reinforcement. And it allows for all kinds of things to be put in there, funny memes and all kinds of things can be introduced into the system to reward the agent and gamify it. But it really is a powerful way to drive engaging interactions. The biggest one that I would call out is cultural differences. Very difficult if you're using offshore collectors to do onshore work. We find using speech analytics is the most powerful way to help someone react to cultural differences they may not even see, to lower the frustration of the customer, to engage them more, to help the consumer resolve the debt. But using our system and systems that are interaction and inter-interaction to drive changes in humans really does a good job at substantial lifts in ROI and collections.
So the real-time product is almost as if there's a whisper coach going on by a supervisor.
More aggressive because it's on the desktop, but yes, yeah, it'll flash and it'll turn colors and it'll whisper loudly, I guess. But yeah, it allows the agent to it consumes some of their desktop, not much, but it allows them to get hints and tips along the way that even pull up knowledge management systems for things that were said.
And this can be easily dropped into an existing infrastructure, right? So it's not like a forklift has to happen.
No, it sits outside of their systems. It actually operates through ours. And so in using our Analyze product, it's integrated directly to that. And it just occupies a tiny little widget. It's an API, it's very open. And a tiny little widget in the corner, and that widget kind of pops up and opens and says, hey, look out here. But yeah, it is not tied directly into CRMs. It doesn't take huge amounts of lift. It's an API, so it pulls the data from where it needs.
That's great. So now, is any of our other panelists, Liz or Katie, have any comments on this idea of driving more engaging customer conversations before we go on to the next topic?
You know, I would just say the first time I ever heard someone do a talk off, you know, because I don't come from a collections background, and I heard someone do a talk off, and by the end of it, you know, I had like, yeah, I got my checkbook open, I'm ready to pay you. You know, it's the amount that a good collector can drive collections to happen. You know, you can use propensity to pay all you want. If the people get on the phone and can't convert the people that are willing to pay into actually paying, you know, it doesn't work. So the idea of that coaching is just so fantastic.
And I'll tell you, Rick, I am not motivated by emojis. I'm motivated by gift cards. So if we're talking about what's going to get me to work hard, that's what it is.
I love it.
So to kind of add on that a little bit, I think that it's important to recognize, you know, I'm obviously more of a digital focused sort of conversation. The phone doesn't go away. It's very important to make sure that you're maximizing your efforts, maximizing that conversation if you've got the right person on the phone, but just considering augmenting that process with digital means, digital outreach. I'm a big proponent of the word omnichannel strategy. I think that that's one of those polarizing words that people feel like it doesn't exist, or, you know, it elicits some type of response from folks. It is different from multi-channel strategy in that you're getting that sort of full picture of how you're communicating with that consumer. So instead of having these siloed strategies between this is how we're going to call, this is how we're going to email, this is how we're going to text, it's giving you that sort of holistic view of how you can maximize efficiencies and maximize efforts across all those different channels.
That's a good lead into the last topic before the Q&A, which is, you know, how do we reduce friction by, you know, trying to stick to channels that clients prefer? I mean, how do you get, instead of putting them down a cattle chute of only one dead end channel, one modality, you know, how can you leverage true omnichannel? Of course, and like what you were saying earlier, Liz, omnichannel is really more about having contextual continuity between the modalities, not just being able to do more than one modality, right? So I'd like you to riff on that a little bit in this last segment in terms of, you know, sticking to channels that clients prefer.
Yeah, so I think, you know, it's funny to see the question worded this way, because historically those words, friction and debt collection, kind of go hand in hand. Right? So I grew up in third-party collections. I've come out with my fair share of battle wounds, certainly, being on the phone and dealing with upset and angry people. And I think, you know, given everything that's going on in the world today, the ARM industry as a whole is preparing for this wave of delinquency, as we were talking about earlier. There's probably a lot of consumers out there who have never been delinquent in their lives. There's this shame and this embarrassment that comes with falling delinquent. So reducing friction from a customer service and a customer retention standpoint, you, the lender, or you, the BPO, need to recognize that story and adapt. So make sure that you're reaching out to the customers over their preferred digital channels. give them the opportunity to go online and self-cure, or even go online and tell you what's going on in their current situation. So there's a McKinsey article that I refer to often. If you've ever heard me speak on one of these things, I'm sure I touched on it. But McKinsey found that outreach over your customer's preferred channel not only improves customer satisfaction, but improves the likelihood for payment at every stage of delinquency. So regardless of which delinquency bucket that consumer falls, you're more likely to keep your customer, and you're more likely to receive payment if you're taking note as to what's their preferred channels. So from an operation standpoint, I'd say it's far cheaper for you to automate the process with machine learning and send a text message or send an email versus making a phone call. So I think it's typically less than a penny to send an email, and maybe less than a quarter of a penny to send a text message. And even when you're taking this through the lens of the third-party agency standpoint, no one wants to have that uncomfortable conversation. So start capturing consent, start capturing preferred communication channels, start leveraging machine learning so that you can scale your business and manage that growing delinquency number without increasing headcount.
Yeah, Liz,
long-winded answer.
It's a great answer, though. I think it's fantastic, and I love how you approach it from the friction it takes to communicate with people. I think that also, and you guys, your AutoML solution is fantastic that you can go and plug it in, right? Also, I always find it amazing how hard it is for people to pay. Like how difficult companies make it to resolve debt. When someone breaks, how difficult it is to reset the debt. All these things that are difficult, and what Liz was saying is so powerful. It's measurement. You have to measure the friction you have now, and you have to measure what you have in an omni-channel sense. How do you even know when someone interacts on the web and then moves to an email and then moves to, and so for me, it's always been about measurement. If you can measure the friction of a thing, you can reduce it. And so when our work in collections is if you can tell people the experience they currently are creating on the agent side and on the consumer side, you can reduce or change that. And one of my favorite was when my last company I worked for was a large debt buyer, and we found that our check by phones were far outweighing our debit cards. And of course, given a preferred method of collection, you would take a debit card all day long, right? As opposed to a check by phone, they're governed by all kinds of different things. And so the question was why, and we took a look, and the arduous process the agent had to go through made it so they would just rather take a check over the phone, even though for the customer, it was so much harder to get the checkbook out, get the check number, to get the routing number, to reread the routing number. But we found that when we simplified the agent's process, the friction reduced and we got the payments that we wanted, which were obviously the debit card transactions, which were more preferable to us. They come out of the same account, right? It didn't matter to us where they came from, but it's just a more preferable way to take money. And so I think Liz is right. Measure it, understand it, and then start to reduce it. And artificial intelligence is about the best way you can imagine to change systems, because it understands everything. And Kate, I think you were going to talk when I stepped in. I apologize.
No, I was not. So.
Well, then go, Katie. You love talking to people.
No, I do. I really do agree though with Liz, because from my side, I am the world's worst millennial that, I never check my text messages. If you send me an email, I'm totally just going to ignore it. If you get me on the phone, like if it's someone else's debt, I'm going to be so ashamed that I'll pay you. So, identifying the right channel for sure is a huge, win in the collection space.
That's good to know, Katie. I'm going to start sending people your way.
Now, I've got a big provocative question for all three of our panelists that is top of mind with a lot of folks who are interested in this kind of technology. And that is, considering, all the stuff that we're able to do today that we've been explaining that you can put into your operation, what kind of innovations do the three of you see on the horizon? I mean, what is it you're licking your chops about in terms of the next step in, what AI can do for collections and receivables recovery? Give us your insight into the future.
For me, I know, I would love to see the people start collecting more data. any of the operations that we're talking about are based on how much data do you have, how much data is available. And from the propensity to pay side, doing things like having DNIS. So if you're sending out a letter and, I can actually identify, did you pay based on this letter? And having attribution and truly being able to measure attribution. Was it that I called you 15 times, you got sick of it, and you looked at a letter and then you paid? Those are the kind of things that, it takes a lot more data to track, but you can track the actual attribution. So, what is the complete strategy that we need in order to convert this account, rather than, their preferred channel is this, or they're this likely to pay. If we can combine those things together, as people collect more and more data on this, I think it's going to be really valuable to help the industry sort of grow into AI.
Excellent. And Rick, what does the future hold for us, Rick?
Oh man, yeah. So I have like the business answer to this question, and I have like the dream answer to this question. So in the business answer, I just envision we're going to see far better processes with a lot less inefficiencies. Why would you ever want to call someone who's not going to pay you? It just seems useless to the individual. It risks a complaint, and also it's just not going to happen. And so as we crisp up more and more data, we'll be able to be more accurate on who we dial. But also, why would you want to collect someone that you should not? Right. One of the things very interesting, if you look at collection calls, we have a large collections client that we work with. And if someone mentions the hardship of homelessness, the propensity to pay is absolutely zero. Mm-hmm. They will not pay, because if you would admit that you're homeless, societally, that's like not a proud moment. And you're saying it on a collections call, it's probably really real. And so how do we begin to understand that if someone says the word hospice, it's probably not a good idea to look at a lump sum settlement. It's probably a better idea to maybe set that debt aside and let that person have those last moments that are important to them. So that's my business answer to the question. I just think we're going to get a lot better at it. We're going to have a lot more efficiencies. But I think about this industry, and I don't know how much longer it will stay the way it is. There's been quite a few entrants in the business in the Silicon Valley sense that have endeavored to begin to reimagine what debt collection looks like. But I can't imagine it's not too far in the future that someone will design a mechanism on the consumer side. So most debt collection is done on the debt collector side, and they go and they endeavor to find consumers and get them to resolve their debt. But it wouldn't be so hard to build artificial intelligence software that allowed a consumer when people go bad on debt, they typically go bad on more than one thing. It's rarely that it would just be a single thing. Maybe a cell phone might be a single thing you go bad on, but generally things get difficult in your lives, and then you have difficulty paying all of your bills, not just a single thing. But it seems like it would be a product that could be designed where a consumer could enter into it. They could list the bills they have. It could begin to understand what their total debt situation is, like consumer credit counseling in some ways, but maybe not that exact process. Sure. And begin to either negotiate or interact with all those companies in a way that's amicable to everyone. I don't know. It feels like there's a reimagining that could take place with the sheer amount of data and the same joint desired outcome that both of the parties have, that it isn't going to be as contentious or as seen as contentious as it has been in the past.
Thanks, Rick. That's very insightful. And I like the way you bifurcated the answer into kind of the commercial answer and then the more technology-oriented one. And Liz, what do you have to share with us in terms of your view of the future, in terms of innovations coming out of AI that will help in collections?
Yeah, so I think I'm in a little bit more of a niche sort of machine learning space. So for me, what we're excited about and what we're looking towards in the future is the more personalization of that experience end to end for the consumer. So we're using machine learning for sort of a segment of it, right? The digital collection strategy. But what can we do with machine learning to personalize that experience on the call to action? So if someone clicks on that link and goes online, what does their experience look like based on their specific situation? So instead of using humans to sort of dictate what that online experience might look like, letting the machine sort of start to calculate that whole end-to-end personalized consumer experience.
Yeah, I love your answer in that I think it's the combination of all the three things that we're talking about right now. I don't think that AI is going to be just one of these things. From a propensity to pay standpoint, I really care what Rick has to say, because if this person has said, like you said, if they said they're homeless or if they've said hospice, like that's really going to change that propensity to pay. And if I'm, Liz, and it's you, when we're talking about, fractions of a cent, they're smaller numbers, but if we can avoid sending some of those, some of those emails, some of those text communications, then, it's super valuable. I think the merging, as people, go from taking, I'm going to have one AI part of my business, to automating lots of little pieces of their business and seeing how those things can integrate together, I think that's going to really drive a lot of change as well.
Yeah,
Yes,
Katie,
indeed.
that's an interesting way to think about that. Because I'm fortunate, I think a lot of us do, working for AI companies. And so everything we do is sort of artificial intelligence
Right.
first. And I know that many, many companies, a greater percentage of companies are certainly not artificial intelligence companies. They're actually traditional organizations that are adding artificial intelligence in. And that you're spot on. I mean, people are expecting new ways to do business. I always lose sight of the fact that it's just sort of who we are. And so, of course you would do it that way. Why wouldn't you put an algorithm in front of it, right? How do you know that? How would you know the coffee maker's empty without an algorithm? I just wouldn't know how to the way to do it. And so I think you're absolutely right. We're going to see greater integration of multiple artificial intelligence platforms, like what Liz has, right? They're an integrator. So bringing lots of different solutions into a single ML solution. That's probably where we're going to see this go. That's a better business answer. Katie wins the gift card on that one.
Take that, Liz.
Dang.
So I think we have time for one more question. This one is kind of, it's a little old school because we've heard this phrase before, but I think it's highly relevant in dealing with AI in the context of a transactional environment, especially in a real-time sense. And that is there such a thing as garbage in, garbage out when it comes to dealing with AI solutions, or do these solutions just magically sort all of that out on their own? So Katie, could you take a bite out of that one?
So, I mean, for any AI solution, there is absolutely garbage in, garbage out. Essentially the machine learning models are kids and you're teaching them. And if you teach them gibberish, then they're going to speak gibberish. But I think it's really important that people understand if there's only a subset of the data that's garbage, like, hey, I know that my data from 3 years ago is really trash, then that doesn't mean you can't get into AI. I feel like people want to have perfect data before they're going to go into AI, and it's never going to be perfect. They're always going to be like, man, I wish I would have collected this. I wish I would have collected that. So I think trying to identify what parts of your data are good and what can you do to stop garbage from coming in the future is really the way to look at that statement. How about you, Rick?
It's a simple answer, yes, right? It's a yes, no question with a yes as an answer. No, absolutely yes, 100% yes. And I'll take it back. I mean, this is a phrase you said, so a tried and true phrase. I would say garbage strategy / garbage in / garbage out, right? There's just so many ways this can go. There's an ethical concern. So is your data ethical? Has it been thought of in that way? And that would be garbage. So imagine that you only send emails to people that have blue skin, or you decide to not ever collect on someone because of a certain thing that they did in their past, and it was just a mistake, right? You hear story after story of that kind of garbage entering in the systems, or the features that you're building off. The engineering that you're doing on your data to make it usable is poorly done. But what concerns me the most is many people I work with don't know what a machine can solve and what it can't. So they don't know an ML problem from another problem. And so too many projects are started that are these grand designs of just shovel the data in and let the machine tell you what to do. And boy, that's not going to ever work. And so I really think it starts earlier with AI. You can actually put garbage data in a system and you can work on it a little bit. You can make it, maybe you'll get better than a coin toss, right? Or some kind of trusted answer. You can get there with enough massaging, but I always worry about the projects that aren't solvable using machine learning. And then too many teams don't have the skill to take on the projects that they do. And so this is just an AI problem. Paying the bills around the Brit House is artificial intelligence. And so a lot of people don't understand what I actually do for a living. I know my parents don't, and my mother and father-in-law actually do not know what I do for a living. It's like robots taking over the world is pretty much what they say. And so leaders don't understand what AI is capable of. And so they don't know when to throw in the towel, and they don't know when to continue. And the teams that are doing the work many times are so excited. It's such cool work that they're doing that they can see right down the road. And like even today, we had to set aside something we've been researching for quite some time, and it's just too complex to put into play. And so if you're going to try to do a Shapley curve on data to see if it fits, the computing power it takes to run a model like that was just well beyond where we could put into play. A carbon footprint alone would be untenable for a model like that. And so as we think about when to throw in the towel, what a strategy looks like, what ML projects are, you have to get there first to even understand if you have the data to go if it's garbage or not. And I think a lot of companies right now are confused on that first question. What is a good ML strategy? What can a machine do because I may have the data to do it? I think they start at the garbage in phase and they just say, this data should solve that problem. That's a long answer, Liz. I want to give you a moment to respond, but that's how I feel about that, Ed.
Thanks,
I
Rick.
can't compete with that passion, Rick. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the better the data quality, the better the result you're going to get. So
I can commiserate with you, Rick, in that we are NLP Logic, so my mom keeps trying to introduce me to her friends that work in logistics.
Oh,
that's what you do, right?
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
I love it. Okay, you guys. Well, look, I would like to, on behalf of the audience, thank everyone for attending. And I want to thank Katie Bakewell and Rick Britt and Liz Schurman, our panel of experts, for taking the time to share their insights and their experience on these very thrilling topics. And I'm hoping that the key takeaway here, everyone, is that you can in fact plug AI into your existing operation. It's nothing to be afraid of, and you can resolve issues having to do with preferred channels, engaging customer conversations, propensity to pay. These are all things that are reachable, that are doable, and please feel free to reach out to these experts based on these emails here, or if you have their phone numbers, so they can help you. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay, who will be telling us a little bit more about the recording.
Thank you, Ed. And thank you everyone today for your time during today's webinar. A recording will be available on the NLP Logic's website for you to refer to or share with colleagues. We'll be sending out emails, so if you'd like to join the NLP Logic's distribution list and receive future newsletters, please visit us at nlplogics.com. With that, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
thank you.